scoring pump and the super scoring.
Focus on mental health, but it's all one.
We need to hear from you.
To water and sewage.
Hi, I'm Donna Cassidy, and welcome back, I'll say back, to another installment of Ask the First Selectman. We're glad to be back. I'm here with our guest, obviously the First Selectman, Tim Herbst. It's nice to see you again.
Great to see you, Donna.
It's been a while since we've done this together.
It has been.
As I said, we were both a little younger then. Time is always not the best of friends, but hopefully everybody else is, so thank you. We have a few questions for you here today.
Sure, absolutely.
You know, a lot of the hot topics that are going on in the town, budget season, you know, there's a lot, you've been very busy, so we're going to start our questions. Obviously, the first question is going to be the simplest and the most important to people is, it's budget season. Where are we going with the process over the next month?
Well, as most people know, I've submitted my proposed budget for the 2016-17 fiscal year to the Trumbull Board of Finance. They have begun public hearings with all the departments. The budget that we have proposed this year, actually, if adopted by the Board of Finance and the Town Council, we will see the mill rate go from 32.87 to 32.77. There will be a reduction in the mill rate, and concomitantly there will be a reduction in residential property taxes. And what I'm most pleased about with this budget is the fact that we've been able to fully fund our pension obligations, restore $377,000 of reductions that were made to the Board of Ed budget, keep our debt levels stable, and also reduce the employee headcount on the town side while providing for 3 additional school resource officers at the same time, which is something that's long overdue. I remember when we had school resource officers when you were on the board, and then we had a little gap there, and now I'm pleased we're going to be bringing 3 back, 1 at each middle school and 1 at the high school. One of the reasons why we've been able to fund school resource officers and focus on a lot of the priorities that matter is because the grand list has shown this year in this budget that I propose overall growth of 1.86%, but what's most significant is that the commercial grand list has grown by 9.5%.
Wow.
So as people are driving around town and they're seeing all of these developments, a lot of this stuff is now starting to come onto the tax rolls. So the grand list growth is going to be critical to helping us, you know, maintain our services, both for town side and education side, but at the same time keeping the tax rate stable and predictable.
And what is the process for the individual citizen? There's public hearings.
Yes.
We'll put them up on the television station here so people know what those dates are. But do you have any idea about when those meetings will take place, or is it too early to really have picked a date for those yet?
Public hearings have been set and scheduled. I would encourage residents to go to the town website, www.trumbull-ct.gov. The website has all of the schedules for public hearings for residents. I do expect the Board of Finance will be having multiple public hearings, and then they will adopt a budget, presumably end of this month, beginning of March, and then it will go to the Town Council for their consideration.
Right, and that usually, the budget is finally completed and decided on about May? Is that usually about the time that
May's when we set the mill rate.
Okay.
Budget's usually decided April.
April, right.
And then the Board of Finance sets the mill rate in May. And the fiscal year starts July 1st.
Wow. Again,
And then we go back at it again.
As soon as you take a breath, it starts all over again.
It does, it does.
Well, it's nice that people are going to hear that the mill rate is going to go down, and they will see a reduction in the payment that they have to make, and that's important to people. So
Absolutely.
You know, times are still a little bit tough for people,
Very
so that's
much so.
really good news to hear. We're going to move on to our next question. There is little to no public discussion about the sewer issue and litigation facing Trumbull. What is your approach going forward, and when do you plan to inform us about your plan to end the costly litigation? I think what people are concerned about is they want to have an open process and want to be able to express their opinions during the process of the sewers. And so I was just wondering, you know, if you can give us some highlights for that.
Well, there certain parts of the premise of that question that I disagree with, in the sense that every member of the town council and the Board of Finance, every board that is a funding authority, all members have been invited to participate in WPCA meetings to become fully aware of the issues that we're facing. Regarding costly litigation, we're fortunate enough that we have town attorneys that are on a monthly retainer, and the WPCA budgets a certain portion of their funding in excess of the monthly retainer to cover any litigation costs. I will tell you that a lot of the litigation costs that have been created, there are two issues. There's the dispute with Bridgeport regarding our agreement, which is coming to finality. And I'm pleased to report that I've had conversations with Mayor Ganem, and we're very close to resolving that. And then there are costs of litigation associated with faulty construction in both Contract 3, which is the Jog Hill section of Trumbull, and Contract 4 that we're in with Mark 4 Construction. I can tell you that regarding our sewer litigation with Bridgeport, a lot of the litigation costs we have incurred are the direct result of the city of Bridgeport trying to take several steps to adversely harm our ratepayers and force them to pay more than what we're paying now. We currently have among the highest sewer use rates in the state of Connecticut because we are a customer at the mercy of the city of Bridgeport, which basically takes a contract and imposes a certain rate upon us. And what they tried to do was not only terminate our existing contract, they tried to eliminate a 13.5% discount rate, which would have raised our fees even higher. Right. They tried to direct bill our residents that we had to fight before the Freedom of Information Commission in the State Superior Court. And what's interesting is we pay a fee to the city of Bridgeport to treat our effluent, and the fee that we're paying and the money we're paying to the city of Bridgeport, they're using that money to sue us. So I fundamentally disagree with our residents being charged more unfairly. As I've maintained, I think we should only be paying for portions of a system that we use. I've maintained that whether it's this contract or a regionalized sewer authority, the people of Trumbull should not be paying for the East Side plant because we don't use the East Side plant. We should pay for those portions of the system we use. Right. The equalizer should remain in effect. Our residents should not be direct billed indiscriminately, I might add. So there are some times that you have to use the legal process to protect your ratepayers and your taxpayers and your community. We've done that. Now, with respect to the ongoing litigation regarding Contract 3, which is the Jog Hill section of Trumbull, on the area of Daniels Farm Road, and Contract 4, which is North Nichols. You know, when I came into office, Contract 3 had been completed and Contract 4 was in progress. And we had serious issues with Contract 3, over 600 identified latent defects. People that drive down Daniels Farm Road see a road that is sinking. It was shoddy construction. It's that simple. So I'm not going to sit back and allow the Trumbull taxpayers to get hit with very high assessments and have that kind of a work product, finished work product, be given to us and claim that that's acceptable. Right. Because at the end of the day, if we don't take legal action to protect the interests of the town of Trumbull, we're going to be paying more to fix those 600 defects, to dig up our roads, to fix catch basins, to fix storm drains, and to repave our roads. So we had a settlement conference last month with the contractor. We're going to try to mediate this to the best extent possible, but we have to protect the town. And we have to make sure that if we were charged for something, we get a product that is not defective, that is not faulty, and that we're not going to, in the long run, pay more for something that should have been done right the first time.
When do you think this process will be wrapped up? You said you're coming to a close soon, hopefully, with the litigation issues with the
trial scheduled for this year. I would like to avoid a trial. I would like to reach a settlement agreement because at the end of the day, a settlement agreement is less expensive than a trial. But you know, the other thing that I want to emphasize is that one of the things that we did to avoid this from happening again is, as you know, with charter revision in 2011, we now have a automatic referendum for bond authorizations in excess of $15 million. And we have controls in place now with a comprehensive purchasing policy that we adopted in 2011. So a situation like what we're dealing with now never happens again, never gets to this point. If there is another sewer project in excess of $15 million, the voters are going to be able to go to the polls and say yes or no, which I firmly believe in. And also, we have a purchasing policy that's going to make sure that there are no more indiscriminate bid waivers, contract extensions that are not thoughtful, lack of oversight on projects, which was a huge reason why we have all these defects on contract 3. We had 732 homes in contract 3 with one inspector and multiple crews. It was set up to fail from the beginning. The reason why we avoided a lot of those same issues on contract 4 is our Public Works Director, John Marsilio, our WPCA, our newly appointed WPCA at the time, brought in much needed oversight to make sure there were multiple inspectors overseeing multiple crews. Similar to what we did with the construction here at the high school. We had a lot of oversight.
Right.
The oversight we had at the high school, we didn't have on the sewer projects. So it created a climate where a contractor could take advantage of a weak system and lack of oversight. And now we're seeing the effects of that, but I'm proud to say it hasn't happened on my watch, and I'm not going to let it happen again so long as I'm the first selectman.
So do you think the litigation process will be wrapped up within the next 3 months, 6 months? You said something about hoping to avoid a trial, or is it just unpredictable?
It's unpredictable. I'd like to shoot for the next 6 months. I want to put this behind us. I will tell you that there are going to be significant repairs that are going to be required in contract 3 especially. I'm very concerned about Daniels Farm Road. I mean, you know, I'm sure you drove down Daniels Farm Road like I did to get here today.
Exactly.
And every time I drive down that road, I get angry because I feel like I'm at great adventure because the road goes like this. We have 3 public schools, actually 4 public schools on this road. It's a concern to me, and it needs to get fixed, and we should not be on the hook for fixing a contractor's faulty construction. The town of Trumbull should not overpay for a contractor's mistakes.
Sensible comment. Getting back to the question too, also, is the money the town spent on litigation, is that available? Is that public information? Is that information, how would people access that? Because there is concern about that, and they would, you know, people would like to know.
Sure.
I don't know how.
Check register for the town is fully accessible to the public. The town
how
attorneys,
would they go through the
they could
treasurer
go to our
or through
website,
the
they could go to the finance director.
Okay.
I can also tell you that we have town attorneys that are on a fixed monthly retainer. So other communities don't do that. They bill hourly. And we have town attorneys that have a fixed monthly retainer, so we're getting a lot of legal services that if they exceed the monthly hourly, they're still on a monthly retainer. We're not paying more for that. The WPCA has budgeted certain funds to cover the costs of litigation. There have been no supplemental appropriations from the general fund. We have budgeted for it. It's been completely transparent. And what we have spent is de minimis to what the city of Bridgeport has spent trying to adversely harm our ratepayers.
Okay, thanks for the information.
No problem.
We have to move on to the next question.
Sure.
We have a limited amount of time. Our next question is, regarding sewers, why would surrounding communities want to break from what they are currently doing to partner with us? Is it realistic to think that we can find regional collaboration for this complex problem when we weren't willing to collaborate on a small-scale health board? So I don't know if you have any.
Well, my response to that would be, you know, I define regionalization as shared benefit, shared burden.
Right.
You know, you all put skin in the game, and at the end of the day, you realize efficiencies, you realize cost consolidations, you realize better services. So that's how I define regionalization. We had a health district that was costing Trumbull and Monroe a lot of money, and Trumbull was subsidizing a lot of an authority that we weren't getting that service back. So a determination was made by not only Trumbull but also Monroe that it did not make sense. Now, regarding sewers, a regional solution is going to be required for that. A regional solution is going to be required for that because I believe a few things. Number one, I don't believe the town of Trumbull can afford to build its own plant at a cost of $150 million with just our users.
Right.
Even if we could afford to build that, we need to get DEP approval. And assuming we could afford to build it and get DEP approval, the biggest question is, where are we going to put it?
Right, right.
And that's not going to be a fun process of displacing neighborhoods or having one side of town upset that the plant's closer to them than another side of town. So I firmly believe it's going to require a regional solution. We're currently in a regional agreement right now, but we're a customer and we're not a decision maker. As I've maintained, Donna, I think the regional solution is one where we are a decision maker, where we have a seat at the table, where we are able to make decisions that are in the best interests of ratepayers, that we make sure decisions are made in a fiscally responsible manner, that we make sure we're making the needed investments in capital on a consistent basis so those costs don't catch up with us over time. One of the reasons why Bridgeport has such high costs is because they kicked the can for too many years in addressing their infrastructure needs. So I think a regional authority could work if we are a decision maker, we have voting authority on a board. I think it needs to be equal representation, which forces the two communities to work together. And I think, as I said earlier, we should only pay for those portions of the system that we use. This was how New Haven got buy-in from the suburban communities around New Haven. Communities like Hamden and East Haven pay for those portions of the system they use, and New Haven covers those portions they do not. I think if we follow that model, it could work, but I am confident that if done appropriately, regionalization long-term will lead to rate stabilization, if not reduction in fees.
Okay. Thank you very much. We're going to move on to our next question. In your budget address, you mentioned solarization of some of the town buildings to tighten energy costs. Are there any buildings that are being solarized other than the schools?
Right now, we're focusing on the schools, arguably because that's where a lot of our energy consumption, and rightfully so, comes from. So to address that cost in the budget, we want to focus on the schools first, because that's where we're going to realize the most savings. Once that's done, I can tell you that we are looking at other town buildings. We're going to be constructing a new senior center. I know there's going to be a conversation by the building committee, especially when they retain architects, about how we can make that a truly green building, possibly solar, because long term, as I said, in my budget address, the largest drivers in any budget, whether it's at the local level, the state level, the federal level, salaries, benefits,
right,
energy costs.
Right.
We negotiate salaries every couple of years, so where we really have to focus are on benefits and energy costs, and that's what we're doing with the energy plan we've developed, and that's what we've done with the healthcare plan that we put into this year's budget.
So chalk up 1 done, 2 to go.
Exactly. Exactly.
We're going to move on to our next question, Tim.
Okay.
New commerce centers are great, but we can't go to them because there is nowhere to park. It seems like we need to build more parking or have enough parking for some. As you mentioned before, there are a lot of commercialization buildings, commercial buildings that are going up in town, and a lot of these are restaurants and places where people will go and stay and park their car. And how are we going to resolve that issue?
Well, I think what's interesting, Donna, is as I tell people, what's interesting about a lot of these new developments, they're completely compliant with the existing zoning regulations. So while people think we don't have enough parking, and they're right, it complies with the existing regulation. So I think what has happened is Trumbull is in transition. You and I used to talk about this some time ago. We talk about there aren't enough restaurants in Trumbull.
Right.
Now we have a lot of restaurants in Trumbull. We have more coming. We're going to open probably 4 this spring alone. So the town is in transition. So what I've asked the Planning and Zoning Commission to do, and I've asked our planner to do, is to look at the existing parking regulations and look at the practical problems we've had, and to change and modify those regulations to address some of these parking issues. I think what we're going to have to look at long term, whether it's Trumbull Center, Long Hill Green, West Hartford's done it, Fairfield's done it to a certain extent. We're going to have to look at areas that are specifically dedicated to parking that might require parking decks, tiered parking, but other communities have done them in their commercial centers, and it has gone a long way to addressing a lot of the parking concerns. I have concerns with off-street parking.
Yes.
Because I don't want this to become a pattern that encroaches into residential neighborhoods.
I think residents might be concerned about that too.
I'm very concerned about it. And when I look at the Long Hill Green and I look at Madison Village and I look at their adjacencies to suburban residential neighborhoods, I want to make sure whatever changes we make don't automatically go to off-street parking.
Yes.
I want to look at the existing regulations first, look at the square footage requirements per parking space, and see if we can make modifications there first before we take the radical
leap
exception.
off to the side streets.
Correct.
Well, when I was growing up, people had 1 car in their family. Now everybody's got a car in their
That's
family.
right, that's right.
We're not the only community that's going through these kind of issues.
That's right.
We'll move on to our next question. The renovated emergency dispatch center was recently unveiled. That's a wonderful thing. Has the new town treasurer been trained with the emergency operations plan? Because I think with regard to town charter, if you're out of town or if you have an emergency, you know, that something's wrong, God forbid, the treasurer is the one who is the next to step in line into your position. So we want to make sure that people are adequately trained and prepared for those kind of positions. So what's the status on that?
I'll give the short answer, yes and yes,
Okay.
to that question. Yes, the town treasurer's been trained. Yes, Stern Village
Hadn't gotten to that yet. You read ahead.
has a fully effective emergency operations plan.
Terrific.
And I should say that the charter grants me the discretion
Right.
to choose to select somebody. And the only reason why, when I was in Washington, that I had selected chairman of the council at that time was because we had a nor'easter moving in, and he had been trained in the emergency operations plan. He had been in the emergency operations center with me during all the hurricanes and blizzards we've had the last 6 years. So I felt comfortable, because he had the training, that he would be able to step in should the need arise. And I think the reason why the treasurer had not had the training at that point was because he was a month into his term.
Right.
He's gotten that training, and I'm confident now that if the need arises again, he'll be able to step in no problem.
And there's no downside to having more than one person as a
Absolutely.
backup there, for that's a good thing. Thank you very much. And we're going to move on to our next question. Consolidating town and education employee health plans to reduce costs seems sound. But why are we rushing to do this for this budget when the state health plan is new and without a track record? And they also want to know, is the town receiving any state incentives to press for this new plan? I know this is a hot topic.
Well, I'll start out with the latter part of the question regarding incentives. The incentive that we would realize is a reduction in our overall healthcare costs. Both the town's consultant and the Board of Education's consultant, two separate consultants, have concluded with fair degree of confidence that the town of Trumbull will realize $3 million of savings as a result of this plan. Now, with respect to the categorization that it's being rushed, I can tell you that well before the Board of Education took any action and well before I presented my budget, there were conversations with the superintendent, the business manager for the Board of Education, members of the Board of Education. I took the initiative to reach out to the president of the teachers union on my own because I felt very strongly, given that she is the leader of the largest bargaining unit for Board of Ed employees, I wanted to have a conversation before anything happened, and I wanted to explain to everybody that I felt very strongly. You know, when Jim Hazelkamp, our labor relations director, came to me with this plan, I said to him, and I was very clear, I am not going to support any type of a plan that reduces or compromises existing employee benefits. I'm not going to do that. The time to even discuss that is when you renegotiate the contract. So when I looked at the plan and I looked at the disruption analysis and I looked at the Board of Ed's disruption analysis and saw virtually minimal disruption, and when I see lower copays for our employees, and when I see a plan that the governor's on and the state legislature's on and judges are on, and I see that this plan has bipartisan support. This is something the state comptroller, Kevin Lembo, a Democrat, has advocated for. The teachers should know that the Connecticut Education Association, the state union that represents their interests, have endorsed this plan. The Fairfield Board of Education is moving to this plan, so it's not accurate when people say we're the only community that's doing this. I have tremendous respect for Dr. Title, who's the superintendent of schools in Fairfield. I have tremendous respect for their Board of Ed. They have determined that this makes sense for Fairfield. They actually made the decision to do this before our board did. So, you know, as I've said, it's important that the leaders of all the collective bargaining units on the Board of Ed side, just like we have done with the town side, are brought to the table and you show them existing plan, proposed plan, and you answer all the questions. And unfortunately what happens is, and you know, I'm kind of, you know, I told Jim Hazelkamp I kind of understand now how Aaron Brockovich felt. Because when you're taking on powerful special interests that are making millions of dollars in an existing plan and stand to lose millions of dollars if a change is made, unfortunately a lot of tactics and misinformation is used to scare employees and to paint a picture that is not true. So one of the things that I've said is truth is the best defense, and we have an obligation to explain to our educational union leadership that this is a good plan. And I have to tell you, we brought all the town unions in, and there is buy-in. They're excited about the plan. They think it's a good plan because a lot of the union leaders recognize that when the contract is renegotiated, Trumbull will likely do what a lot of other municipalities have done and go to a high deductible plan. Because as Obamacare is seeing full effect and the Cadillac tax, as they call it, is set to be implemented, health insurance costs are going to increase for every municipality, the state, the federal government. So now municipalities are looking for creative ways to maintain good quality coverage for your employees while reducing the overall cost to the taxpayer. So in the absence of this state plan, I got to tell you, I think a lot of the educational union leadership understands this. When the contract's renegotiated, and you've been through a few negotiations, so you know what it's like, the high deductible plan will not be as good of a plan as the state partnership plan.
I want to get back just to two quick issues. That one, getting back to one part of the question, another, what you said about bringing all the groups together. Mm-hmm. Is there enough time for people to absorb this and to collaborate and to have discussion during this budget season?
Absolutely.
I mean, the budget season is, you're in the process, like you said, you submitted your budget already.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you asked that question. The Board of Education's intent, as I understand it, is to provide for the conversion to the state plan by September 1st. So that gives a very significant window of time to work out a lot of these issues. I can also tell you that when we talk about fact and fiction, you know, a lot of people said, well, you know, the first selectman assumed the $3 million in his budget. He just assumed it, and, you know, what if this doesn't happen and we're stuck with a $3 million hole? Well, I did not do that. If you look at the budget, what I did was I took the estimated cost of providing health coverage under the state plan and budgeted for that number. And then I took an excess amount and I put that money into a contingency account. So in the event that this doesn't work out, or in the event that there are unforeseen conditions, you know, that no one anticipated, right, there's a reserve account in place to make sure that there is not a hole.
Forward planning. The last part of the question was talking about the state incentives. You talked about how the town would recognize the incentives because of the combining of the plans, but has the state made an offer as an incentive to you to combine these plans? Because you said you were working with the person that's up at the state.
Well, one advantage right out of the gate is currently we're self-insured, and there's a significant amount of stop-loss coverage between the town and the Board of Ed. That stop-loss coverage comes off the table if we go into the state plan. Currently, the Board of Education is spending $1.3 million on stop-loss coverage. So right there, just by taking the stop-loss coverage off the table because we are self-insured and going into the plan, you're going to realize significant savings with respect to that. And, you know, the other thing you have to understand is right now, currently, under the self-insured model, there is a $1.1 million gap currently before we go into state plan as a result of high claims. We're going to have to fund $1.1 million. Now, we have an account to do that. But I think what's significant to note is if we take the town of Trumbull, our town employees, our Board of Ed employees, figure a few thousand, and we go into a plan that covers 200,000 lives in the state of Connecticut, that's a very large pool with a lot of claim experience where arguably the shift is more predictable than it would be in a smaller pool if you have a few high claims.
Right.
So look, we've vetted this. Our labor relations director is somebody who has worked for Mayor Norwalk, former Mayor Malloy of Stamford, who's now our governor, Mayor of Bridgeport, Mayor of Waterbury, has a lot of experience. We have very good consultants, and both the Board of Ed consultants and the town consultants, two different consultants, have concluded this will represent $3 million of savings.
So then, other than the realized gain from combining the two plans, the state has not made an offer to you. You're saying the state has not made an offer or any incentive in order for you to go ahead, or the town to go ahead and combine these plans?
Well, they provide the option to municipalities, which didn't exist before. You know, they changed the legislation to provide for it, and as I mentioned, the stop-loss coverage in and of itself represents significant savings and arguably is an incentive that we would not otherwise have but for being allowed to go into the state plan. And you're getting a very good health care plan. Look, the people in Hartford, sometimes I scratch my head. And look, you and I both know they have the best health care there is. We know that. So if we can take advantage of that and get a good health care plan for our employees with de minimis risk to the disruption of doctors and care providers, and at the same time reduce costs to the Trumbull taxpayers, for me it's a no-brainer.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Again, time is of the essence. We're going to move on to our next
Sure.
question. Why did you say that the health insurance move idea was met with a favorable reaction from the union when it was clearly not? And I think we discussed a little bit of that, but I don't know if you want to follow up with some of that.
Well, I don't agree with the premise of that question because it said the union. Well, we have a lot of unions. So which
The unions.
Yeah, which unions?
And maybe some more clarification for further discussion
Which
might be needed
unions
on
are
that.
we talking about? I can tell you that the town unions have been very receptive to this. I can tell you that, look.
And they may be speaking about the Board of Ed.
Okay, and if they're talking about the Board of Ed unions, I will tell you that I know for a fact that there was a meeting held by Anthem with union leadership that Anthem said was off the record. And I can tell you that after that meeting, I had a conversation with one of the union presidents who shared with me some of the things that were shared in that meeting. And much of it was absolutely false. And I can tell you, if I had seen that after a meeting, I would be opposed to a plan too. So this kind of goes back to what I said earlier, Donna. We have to educate. We have to make sure people are being presented the facts in an unbiased way from disinterested parties. As I said, when you have special interests who are making millions of dollars off the town of Trumbull and stand to lose millions of dollars if a change is made, they're going to go to arguably very extreme measures to protect their interests. So I want to make sure that people understand that town unions were consulted, because I control town unions. That's all we control.
Right.
And they were educated extensively with respect to this plan. I reached out to educational union leaders probably 2 months ago to discuss the merits of this plan. I met with the superintendent, the Board of Ed. You have 2 consultants that have looked at this. So I think a lot of the opposition is the result, quite frankly, of outright misinformation that's being spread.
So all this misinformation or confusing information, for lack of a better expression, will be defined and clarified and ready to be made a decision in September, like you said, by
The
December.
conversion they'd like to make by September. What I would like to see happen, and I've expressed this to the chairman of the Board of Ed, I would like all of the union leaders on the Board of Ed side to be brought in as soon as possible to not only meet with our superintendent, their broker, our Board of Ed, but also the town leaders. And let's put the facts on the table, because I am confident, I'm very confident, that when that happens, a lot of this misinformation is going to be addressed. And I'm also confident that our rank and file are going to look at this very practically and say that this is much better than going into a contract negotiation and possibly facing a high deductible plan. It's common sense at the end of the day.
And I think that needs to be done rather quickly, because not knowing is part of people's reasons for resistance. So the more information you have, the better it is.
And healthcare is a very emotional issue.
Exactly. Well, exactly, because it affects us personally.
Absolutely.
We're going to move on to our next question. As First Selectman, what are you doing in your efforts to outreach with civility and encourage spirit of bipartisanship? And I do want to, follow up with that question, because I remember during the last election there was a big push for civility and to be able to communicate with each other. And I look at a town like a successful sports team, from management on up, is that when a team works together, the team is so much more productive. You can't have a superstar here and a superstar there with the rest of the team not fully functioning. So, if you can address that, because you are really sort of the coach of the team or the manager of the team.
Absolutely.
And hopefully things are moving forward with that, because people want to be able to participate in town and want to be able to have their voice heard and want to be able to respect it with their voice, whether it's something you want to hear or not. So I just want to hear your follow-up on
Sure.
that.
Well, you know, one of the things I'm proud of is the fact that, notwithstanding the fact that there's a Republican majority on the Police Commission, we have a democratically elected chairman in Roger McGovern. We have a Planning and Zoning Commission that has a democratically elected chairman in Fred Garrity. And I think the commission is really, both of those commissions, if you look at them, when you walk into the room or you watch them on TV, you cannot tell who is a Democrat or Republican. And in a small town, I think that's how it should be. Now, here's what I think is the biggest challenge to civility, because civility is a two-way street.
Absolutely.
You can't tell somebody to be civil when you're uncivil and vice versa. So one of the things that I said when I was sworn into my 4th term, and I was speaking to the people of Trumbull, and I said in an open letter to the Trumbull Times, we need to stop talking at each other and start talking to each other. And we need to start talking like this instead of this. You know, where people hide behind computer screens and say some pretty nasty things on social media that they would never say to a person's face. You know, I try not to read the social media stuff because it'll drive you crazy. But of course I have things that are shown to me and shared with me. And I see some of these people in person, and they would never say to my face what they say behind a computer screen or on social media. So if we want to be a civil community, and this is a problem I might add that other communities are facing too with the advent of social media.
Schools, everyone's going through these.
People need to talk like this. Need to be able to have a
Word-to-word
conversation.
conversation.
Word-to-word conversation.
Face-to-face.
And if you disagree, it's okay to disagree. You know, it's okay to disagree on issues without making it personal. I mean, we're not going to agree on everything. You know, I often tell people in my party, I don't agree with people in my party.
Right.
And I say sometimes to them, look, you do what you think is right. All I would ask is that you give me the opportunity to allow me to share with you why I feel a certain way.
Right.
And my job is to try to convince you that I'm right. And I'm not going to be successful all the time. But we need to be able to have an open dialogue of communication. You know, it's not civil if you have a question about the charter, for example, and you're a government official. It's not civil to send an email to the town attorneys requesting a legal opinion. And before they can even respond to that, that question has been forwarded to Neil Vigdor of the Connecticut Post, and then it becomes a media melee. If you have a question, we'll answer the question. But if the question and the intent of the question is to create you know, political theater where, quite frankly, none exists, that's not civil or productive. So, look, I have said I maintain an open door policy. If you want to come in and have a conversation, I prefer this rather than this. But, you know, civility is a two-way street, and people need to, quite frankly, be able to say things through an email or on social media that they'd feel comfortable saying to a person's face. And if they can't do that, then they shouldn't say it.
And I think, like, when people make mistakes, like you said in regard to a letter going off to them, I think that's a learning tool for people, and not only for that person, but for other people moving forward. But I remember, you know, my years on the Board of Ed, being in that Board of Ed chairman, and your mom was chairman, and being in that Board of Ed chairmanship position, you get, people make comments that you don't necessarily agree with. And I developed a very thick hide, and I'm a big believer of kill them with kindness. You know, it's just, you have, you know, anybody who is in any leadership, whether it's you or a leader of the town council or the Board of Finance, anyone that's in a position, I'm not singling you out, I'm just saying leadership positions need to lead by example and not let people, not get upset by what people say, because people are very passionate about how they feel, and sometimes passion gets in the way of comment. And like you said, especially when they're, you know, veiled behind a computer screen. So, you know, I think that
I don't disagree that passion's important.
Right.
It's one thing to be passionate.
Right.
It's another thing to be disrespectful.
Right. And I
People
think
can be
sometimes people can
passionate
cross that line easily.
without being
which
disrespectful.
Right. And it's easy to cross that line.
Absolutely.
And as long as people understand that, if you want to speak to leaders in the town, work together, speak mutually polite to each other, and let's move forward in making the town a better place to live, because Trumbull is an awesome place to live.
One of the things that Carl Massaro did recently that I agreed with was we went to the first council meeting. And I walked in, and I'm looking at the chairman of the council who's up on the podium, and the Republicans are sitting here, and the Democrats are sitting here.
And I don't want to get into too much politics.
But I said, why aren't we sitting based upon districts? So District 4 sits here, District 3.
We'll just mix it all up.
Which mixed it all up.
Right.
And you know what? It's interesting. The first meeting where it was this and this, you could cut the tension with a knife. And then when Carl changed the seating arrangement, where people sat by districts,
Right.
there was less of that.
Less of that. Because we're all here for the same thing. Everybody's
You
here
know.
to make the town, you know, the best
And it
place
was a
to
good
live.
thing.
Yeah, very good. All right, we're going to move on to our next question. How is Suzanne doing? Suzanne Bermonico, there was an accident involved. I did not know about this, so I hope that everyone is well. Can you give us an update on that?
They are lucky to be alive. I can tell you that. It was by far one of the worst car accidents I've seen in my 6 years in
Frightening.
office. You know, if you know, by the grace of God, and also because of Sue's quick instincts in trying to swerve out of the way, had she not done that, it would have been fatal. There's no question about it. And you know, Sue's home. She's recovering. A lot of bumps and bruises, but she's a fighter. And her husband has broken both of his legs. He's had surgery, and he is recovering and in physical therapy. And you know what? They're both in tremendous shape. You know, Suzanne's husband Dominic is going to be 80 this year, and he runs probably one of the quickest 5Ks for a 79-year-old that I've ever seen. He came in 25 seconds behind me in the Jingle Bell Run 2 years ago.
Well, being in good shape
And
helps your
but
healing process a
he
lot
made,
better.
He made me feel
Yes.
bad, but he is in incredible physical shape.
Right.
Both of them are. So I think that's going to help them both heal.
And they have each other, which is good.
Absolutely,
So
absolutely.
I wish them the best. I did not know
Absolutely.
about that, so I hope that they have a speedy
Absolutely.
recovery. So thank you for being so patient, Tim. You did a great job. Thank you for asking all those questions.
Thank you.
A real mixed bag.
This is great.
If anybody has any questions, it will be listed up on the television here where you can contact for the questions. We encourage you to ask questions. As I said to Tim, we want to make this the best town to live in. So if you have a question, please send, try to phrase it respectfully. Thank you, and we'll address it at the next Ask the First Selectman. So thank you for tuning in. We'll see you again soon, and enjoy the rest of the winter, early spring. Awesome.
Hope so.
Thank you. Good night. Goodbye, everybody.